Today is Victory in Europe Day.
Just as I have a dream.
A salute from Mr. Nelson Mandela.
And Mrs. Thatcher.
Okay, hello, welcome to Systems Reimagined episode 8. Today I'm joined with Samuel and Rachel once more to break down some news stories over the past week, or I guess weekend, since we last recorded and stuff. Today we're going to probably be primarily speaking about COVID-related things. Rachel's going to start us off with some news regarding when lockdown is easing in the UK, because that with the success of the vaccine rollout, that's kind of been prominent and on people's minds. And then then later on, we're going to speak a little bit about some green energy news within the UK, with factories being set up in Coventry, essentially. To produce batteries for electric vehicles. And then finally, we're going to move on to a little bit of an international section regarding Trump's impeachment, Princess Latifah, I hope I said that right, some snap lockdowns in Melbourne and Auckland, and finally some things to do with Indian ministers with regards to Me Too, etc. So I guess Rachel, start us off if you don't mind.
Yeah, of course. So there's quite a lot of kind of COVID-related news. We obviously have the positive that the vaccine rollout has gone to plan. We hit that February 15th milestone, and that all of those key identified vulnerable groups had received the vaccination. But from there's a lot of public pressure, media pressure, and also pressure from the backbenchers that the government lay out some kind of a roadmap now going forward in terms of easing the lockdown. So Boris has been quite hesitant to do this, just kind of highlighting that stay-at-home message again. But this following Monday, he is going to set out some kind of a roadmap as to how we can expect restrictions to be eased. I think that will be a return to the tiered system in terms of regional kind of restrictions, but it will be interesting to see exactly what he says and to what extent he's kind of led by the science on that, because we've seen sometimes he tries like a kind of really tricky balance between the scientific advice and sage and also kind of his backbenchers and the economy and things. So we'll see kind of what direction he swings to this next week. Just in the meantime, before that announcement, the chief of the NHS has warned that a kind of normal life is still very far off, that we will see social distancing for months and if not years to come. And just again, kind of highlighting how people really still need to be very, very cautious and kind of just very mindful of the different variants and things that are very much in circulation in the UK still, like 700 deaths yesterday. They're no longer rising, but they're not falling at the rate that a lot would hope that they would be. To
be fair, just hate to interrupt you, but to be fair, the cases, like if you look at the graph of the cases, it's like a really steady, not steady, very steep drop. Like deaths are different though, but definitely. Sorry, continue.
Yeah, no, that is really good to outline that kind of the cases have been reducing, because at one point, like they were doubling by like maybe 10,000 every day. So it's obviously really good that they are coming down. But as you say, deaths are still kind of a big issue for public health. In terms of hospitals and that interview with the NHS director, he also kind of highlighted how there's probably going to be around 10 million backlogged operations and kind of routine procedures that have had to be put off with the pandemic, but they're kind of going to really come to a forefront, he thinks, around April time. There's been various calls to use the Nightingale hospitals to deliver some of these routine surgeries. For the moment, obviously, kind of emergency surgery is being prioritised, but that can only last for so long. And hopefully, as kind of hospital beds are more free with less cases and less kind of COVID patients, then that's something that can start to be sorted. But certainly in the short term, that backlog is going to put immense pressure on the NHS. There were also there was a series of new kind of watchdog reports just in the final segment on this kind of COVID section, in that Generation COVID have been forgotten about, and they are the people, it's those children that need to take priority after the pandemic. I think a lot of people have quite rightly said that every group has hugely struggled, whether you're kind of like a first-time house buyer, or whether you've got a mortgage, or whether you're, there's no kind of demographic within society that hasn't been adversely impacted by the pandemic. But I do have a lot of sympathy for this watchdog coming out and highlighting how kind of isolation from peers, from fellow pupils, from just face-to-face teaching, alongside social media use, rising kind of mental health issues, the younger generation do certainly need to have kind of provisions in place for that return. Hopefully something that will combat that is schools going back at the beginning of March. Now that we've hit that vaccine quota, that's one of the first kind of areas that the government want to open up. But I think it will be interesting to see how much is actually done about that, quote unquote lost generation of students, and especially those, like we've spoken about, and we probably will again, from more disadvantaged backgrounds who don't have the same access to kind of remote learning, and they really struggle with devices or with suitable and adequate broadband and things. So I think it will be very interesting to see kind of how the government deals with each demographic of society going forward, but especially that kind of below 18.
Yeah, quickly, I'll just say as well, I love the whole, it's good that the vaccine rollout has been successful and stuff, but on a personal note, I guess not too good, because that now means that I have to shave "I love the Tories" into my head, as Rachel rightly reminded me a couple days ago, or when it was announced, I guess. But yeah, I think just generally, the whole idea about hospitalizations and stuff as well. We are seeing a really rapid decline in cases, as I said, and with deaths as well, a bit more slowly. But with hospitalizations, it's kind of crazy because it's obviously declined a lot from when it was the peak of of this wave, essentially. But we're matching the hospitalizations now that we had in the first wave, and that's just crazy to think about. It just goes to show how to the brink the NHS was pushed, at the peak of this wave, and things like that. And I guess how much of a gruesome time it was overall, to be honest. So yeah, I thought I'd point that out. And yeah, the generation COVID, I guess, and how different groups are impacted by the effects of coronavirus differently, I think might be something which I'm going to highlight or expand on a little bit later, especially when it's relating to something that the EHRC essentially flagged the other day with regards to women, but I want to generalize them more to different ethnic minorities as well. But yeah, anyway, that's just my brief comments on that.
Yeah, so I think there's a lot to dig into what you were saying, Rachel. I first want to start off with the how we're gonna phase out of the lockdown, and you were mentioning how Boris finds himself in a balance between more economics related arguments about maybe phasing out in a more quicker manner, or also following the advice of science. So I think as we learned throughout this whole pandemic, I think following the science at the end of the day, in the long run, benefits you economically. So I do think, hopefully he's learned the lesson in the fact that if you do follow the science and you do maybe impose stricter measures, the economic recovery in the long run will be better, as we've seen with countries who have been more stricter in that sense and have followed the science more precisely, So yeah, so it'll be interesting to see what he does there. But yeah, I think hopefully, in my eyes, I think for the phasing out, I think we should be doing, as you said, more regional based approach. So depending on, if there's a spike in cases in one region, I think we can make it more stricter in that particular area. Then also, yeah, just phase systems as well. I think, like after the first lockdown, I think there was a bit of naivety, and I think Boris was very keen to like open up stuff in a very fast manner, and I think hopefully we don't follow the same route as that. And I think, yeah, if we're more careful in how we phase out this, the lockdown, I think the less likely the chances that there'll be a uptick again, especially with the vaccine coming through. So it'll be interesting to see his plan for that and how he goes about it. I think also regarding the backlog, I think it is a big issue actually, because there have been a lot of horror stories. I think, at least in my personal life, there have been stories where people have had serious, diseases, or like, someone, for example, has cancer and they cannot receive the adequate treatment because, it's full capacity of the NHS. So I do think it's something that needs to be addressed. And I think, reusing the Nightingale, for example, would be helpful, and also create more space to maybe treat people who are not, it's not COVID, but they have other serious issues with them. And yeah, I think that definitely needs to be taken into consideration. So hopefully something is done to address that issue. Yeah, and yeah, just the last issue around the children. I think, yeah, as you said, I think, schooling is definitely like, it's the vital component of social development for kids. We need schooling to communicate, to properly express ourselves, and to, just have social relations and properly form that in as we grow up. So I think it is a big loss for the kids who haven't been able to do that. And also, I'm sure there's a lot, as we know, there's a lot of issues arising in the household since this lockdown, like uptick in domestic abuse, for example. So it's yet to be seen how would that affect children who have to experience that and have to be stuck in the home and expose themselves to that. So yeah, I definitely think there needs to be a focus on students and how we can address the certain issues that have come about with this lockdown. But also, I think it's also not just students, as you said, it's everyone within society that has been negatively affected mentally and economically. So I think we need to rethink how we, community, social relations, because I feel like, especially here in London, this such a disconnect in within neighborhoods and communities. There's not much communication, not much relationships forming. So hopefully, there's effort being made to, encourage community communication, and just getting together and doing stuff and just building these social bonds, and to stop the alienation, because the alienation was there before COVID. But I think, as with many other things, COVID has just strengthened this feeling, So yeah, I think needs to be a whole lot done to address that.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Can I say something quick, Rachel?
Yeah.
I will say, in fairness to Boris Johnson, at least his rhetoric, I saw a quote today saying that he doesn't want to set a date or whatever. He's following the science and stuff like that. So at least on the surface, it appears like, my point is, I don't think we should pressure Boris Johnson into setting a date, setting whatever, right? I think that's dumb. I think at the end of the day, what we need to do is take it day by day. And if we see, for example, this new South African variant spreading, which is a fear that the government has, and it's predicted to be the dominant strain in the UK, I read the other day, then, if we have a huge uptick in cases with that, hopefully we won't. But if we do, then obviously we have to ditch plans for whatever date that we made it, right? And we just take it day by day, week by week, and have a real, just sensible approach to, how we handle this. And of course, obviously, it's really hard on people's mental health and things like that. But I guess it's just something that we have to get through. I guess that's kind of easy to say, I guess, from my shoes right now. But, I guess in the overall picture of things, keeping people safe from COVID is a much greater is of greater importance in the short term, at least. So yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I think obviously like it's really easy for us to say from like such a relative position of kind of privilege, like hang in there a bit longer. But I do think it's probably the most positive situation that it's been for, well, the past year in terms of the successful vaccine rollout and things. So I
Yeah.
think if the government are sensible, and it's interesting you kind of giving Boris credit, and quite rightly so, but also
Yeah.
it's like, well, he kind of, there's no other reason that he wouldn't, like, as in he must have learned from those past mistakes of perhaps easing it too soon, or perhaps easing it at the right time but just kind of accelerating like the easing too quickly in terms of eat out to help out and things like that, which we've spoken at length about.
Yeah.
um
Let's all get back into that one.
yeah, but exactly, so kind of like he has no other choice but to have learned from these mistakes. So I'm like hesitant to kind of like give him too much credit there, but obviously like it's a good thing for sure. I know you're not particularly
Yeah, no,
keen.
no, no. Yeah, I'm just trying to say, like, isn't like the fact of the matter is, if he would have messed up a third time, I mean, that would be unbelievable. Like,
Yeah, yeah, for
I know we
sure.
saw, you know,
Yeah, like when so much money is being pumped into the like vaccination rollout and kind of like paying inoculators and even just the services and facilities and things that's needed for such a huge like logistical program to be a success. But just really quickly, I think it's so important to like come in and agree with what Samuel was saying in terms of like, I feel in the news it's so often reported about kind of like, oh, children are say like 4 school months behind on their work and on their like numeracy and literacy and things. And of course that's awful. And there's been a lot of studies done recently in terms of the kind of economic shortcomings that that will have for careers for students and like all this crazy stuff, which I'm not too sure where they can even like get their data. I saw I think it was like a BBC one which we'll link. But it's crazy to be able to kind of highlight what children are missing out in school and how that will kind of impact the economy like 10 years down the line. But it was interesting nonetheless. But I think that aside, what Samuel was saying and what really kind of isn't getting kind of the oxygen of publicity as much as it maybe should be in the news is those like social interactions and those kind of like soft skills and building interpersonal relationships with teachers, with students. Like I think it's just having such a huge impact. I've seen kind of like even just tweets and things from people in the media's eye, who have a platform, who are kind of saying like, my children get so excited when the postmen come to the door because like, you know, they're not getting any kind of
yeah,
stimulation seeing anyone outside of their family bubble. And that's maybe the children that are fortunate in that like they have all of the support and kind of like devices and broadband and things that's necessary for them to access online learning. But you can't, like, no amount of money in the world can kind of get those playground activities and those different like social building relationships and things that are being missed out on. So I think it will be really interesting to see what kind of like roadmap is put forward for that. And I mean, realistically, if there is one. But yeah, that's what I kind of had on that one.
quickly to add to that as well, like, as in we speak about kids here, but I mean grandparents. I mean that's a whole different, like, that's a whole other ball game. You know, kids at least went to school, you know, for certain sections of the year at least. But like grandparents, some grandparents haven't seen, you know, their grandkids or their kids for like months and months and months, or even a year in some cases, right? So, so yeah, that's just something I wanted to highlight over there. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah,
Apart from that,
yeah.
I didn't really have another point, to be honest. But I just wanted to point that out, I guess.
No,
Yeah.
no, I think just kind of really quickly to add to that because it's such a good point. Although I kind of highlighted children because it's the foundations of building those relationships. Like when they're established and then taken away, that's like possibly even more damaging. Like I know just kind of from like my own grandparents' experience and things, it's horrible that kind of distancing and a lot of the there's a really amazing organization called the Joe Cox like Loneliness Trust, and that's about kind of how like loneliness really can be a killer, and the really, really adverse impacts that it has on a lot of elderly people who've maybe like lost a spouse because of COVID or because of another condition, you know, maybe just natural old age and things, and then they have this isolation on top of that. I think, yeah, it's interesting in that there's no kind of particular cure. Like the vaccination maybe isn't enough for these people, but again, like, will just be so kind of intriguing to see what government do to try and aid that. But like, as we were saying, there's just every kind of demographic needs help.
Yeah, I think what Samuel was saying, and he can correct me if I'm wrong, with the whole approach to this, basically like the whole idea of coming out of this lockdown. I think Sal, you're trying to say like it opens up an opportunity for us to build more communal-based systems to help, you know, vulnerable people in society, right? Was that kind of more or less what you're trying to say?
Yeah, I mean, not only vulnerable people, but yeah, that's definitely a priority. But also, I think just in general, like, you know, reimagining our social relations within people around in our community. You know, like I look at like the National Food Service, for example, like, and that goal, it's not only to feed people, but it's also to build relationships within your community. So I think more like programs like that, you know, just to rebuild certain social relations and improve upon that we had post-COVID, pre-COVID, sorry. So yeah, definitely. I would definitely like to see that, and especially with vulnerable people as well, for sure.
Yeah, because like I'm just thinking back to like the tier system in place, you know, previously, and whether that will actually be. I'm sure some form of that will be implemented, but like I felt that, and I think we spoke on the podcast a little bit about this, how we felt that sometimes it wasn't localized enough in certain cases. So I wonder if that'll be something which, you know, with, you know, this plan coming out, if they'll try engage in that a bit more and try give more specific areas or zones, you know, more intense restrictions than others and stuff like that, right? Like, so yeah, anyway, I wanted to make that point. Like, it'll be interesting to see what they do about it overall, and I hope that obviously it goes well. And like, you know, Boris Johnson also made it quite clear that he wants this to be the last lockdown that they do. So I think with that, he's kind of expecting a sort of public trust in the fact that, you know, the public essentially understands that, oh yeah, we're gonna have to stay inside a little bit longer because this is the final lockdown that we'll have and all that jazz, right? So yeah, I don't know. I hope he just takes his time, does it properly, no more lockdowns, and then we'll all be happy, you know? Like, that'll just be great. And then I can finally stop tweeting about how, imagine if we were New Zealand or something with like pubs and stuff open. So yeah, I think that's I guess, you know, that's a good point there.
Yeah.
Okay, should we okay, I guess following on from COVID, I don't know if anyone has anything else to say on that lockdown strategy thing. Okay, so on to more, I guess, sad news, or I guess kind of following along similar lines to what, you know, we just spoke about. There's this Guardian piece essentially published, and it basically highlighted the impact of COVID on women, essentially, and it showed that the Equality and Human Rights Commission, the EHRC, is facing demands to investigate claims that ministers have sidelined key gender laws in response to COVID. The Trade Union Congress, Amnesty International, and Save the Children have accused the government of taking decisions that would be deepening inequalities between men and women, particularly. So one of the specific examples which they include is the fact that self-employed women who have taken maternity leave have received reduced COVID support payments, and that's being challenged in court right now. So like, as in, obviously the specific example is bad and like we should reverse that and that shouldn't be a thing, but I want to generalize this kind of idea a bit more, because it's not just women, for example, who are being impacted negatively, although they obviously are. It's also, you know, can be really almost every ethnic minority group is also being, you know, impacted negatively by or disproportionately by COVID. This recent study from the University of Manchester showed that ethnic minority people, or like people in ethnic minority groups, will have experienced a 25% higher COVID death rate. And one section in particular, which I really wanted, or two, I guess, that I really wanted to highlight was they said that the basically the reason for this discrepancy, right, is it said that the increased risk results from the underlying social and economic inequalities that ethnic minority people face, including poorly paid and insecure employment, overcrowded and poor quality housing, living in deprived neighborhoods, and high rates of concentrated poverty. And the report also said there's no evidence for genetic or genetically related biological factors underlying this increased risk, including vitamin D deficiency. For those who don't know, it came out recently that vitamin D is really good for tackling COVID. But basically, the reason why I wanted to essentially highlight this is because, especially that last kind of sentence is quite key. If there's no like genetic or biological basis for these discrepancies, it essentially means that these things are all like social based. And what that means is that we have the ability to change these systems of oppression in many ways if we really want to. And so obviously here it's highlighting things like pay and economic class in some sense, but it's also intersectional in some ways. I don't have a quote on me right now, but if you go on to read the report, I can link it down below in the description box. It goes on to speak about how people of color are even more harmed by this, right? And so I guess in general, the reason why this kind of speaks to me is because I feel like it relates a lot of the things that we include in this podcast, like ideas about workers' rights, working conditions, things like that. It all comes to play in this symphony, I guess. That's a bit of a light word for this whole situation, but essentially, yeah, all these complex factors come together and results in things like this. And the reality is that we can change it, but we just need to have we need to put pressure on and advocate for these issues. And I'll let you guys talk in one sec. Sorry for this bit of a tangent, but yeah, I mean, I guess in general, another point that I feel like is I see a lot on like the liberal left, I would say, is like, and we'll speak a little bit more about the liberal left in the international section. But what I will say is that people will obviously say something like, okay, ethnic minorities have experienced a higher death rate, right? That's bad. We don't want that. Okay, everyone should say that, because if they don't, then I don't know. That's a little bit sus on their side. Like everyone should want, equality in at least that way. But when you start breaking it down to more like the subsequent issues which define, which essentially allow for this to happen, I find a lot of people not really being so for that. Like idea of increasing pay and working conditions, for example, can come hand in hand with idea of increasing trade union membership and provide and kind of being actively trying to oppose some laws set out by governments, such as like you can't protest in solidarity with a different company or factory. I forget that is essentially what it is. So yeah, my point is that like I feel like there needs to be more consistency in people's beliefs if they essentially believe something like ethnic minority people having experienced higher death rates is a bad thing. And I opened the floor. Sorry about that.
Yeah, I mean, we've mentioned this a lot throughout all these different episodes, but COVID has definitely accelerated and widened inequalities that were there before this pandemic happened. So as you said, we've discussed how racial minorities and BAME community has been disproportionately affected by COVID. Also now what you talk about when it comes to gender as well, there is a clear gap in who is more worstly affected. And I mean, I think what this pandemic has showed us is that, first of all, it's widened inequalities when it comes to economics. So owners of like multinationals have increased their wealth disproportionately, while the average worker has lost money and lost pay, for example. And this has just widened the wealth inequality. And in these economic dynamics, there are we don't say intersectional to be trendy and sound cool, but there actually is disproportionately like race and gender does matter when it comes to this stuff. And due to historical reasons, due to current reasons, and in the current economic system, race and gender do play a role in these inequalities. So yeah, there definitely needs to be, we need to address issues. And I think along with pointing this out and pointing these disproportional, who disproportionately gets affected by this, we also have to tie this to, our current economic system and, and our history in this country, because that has played a role to where we are today. So yeah, definitely. I think, yeah, I mean, we kind of run away from this, and we have to look at this, even like how we want to address this post-COVID, and because I mean the problems were there pre-COVID, but we try to bury it in the sand. But I think COVID now has made it like it's something that we can't ignore anymore, and something that needs to be addressed.
Yeah, very transparent, I feel like.
Yeah.
Rachel?
Yeah, for sure. I really agree with what you've both kind of mentioned there. I think definitely kind of in terms of just those like social dynamics and things, I saw Middlesbrough, kind of where I'm originally from, has one of the highest increasing, like fastest growing spreads of coronavirus, and it's really been kind of hit one of the worst hit areas in terms of the pandemic, alongside a lot of the north and northeast. And they were interviewing kind of the head of the local NHS trust, and he was again just highlighting these points that we've said around how the kind of social background is just so bad for a lot of residents, that it really is these social kind of ramifications that are having an impact. It's not enough to just say kind of like, oh well, we're not too sure why, but like it is true that these particular demographics are worst hit. There's like catalogs of evidence as to why that would have been the case. So I think it's certainly worth addressing and kind of carrying on highlighting why do BAME communities have higher infection rates and things, and really trying to get to the root of those issues.
Yeah, no, exactly. And like, I just think more generally, like, I just hate it sometimes when, on the online, like, right-wing community, I guess, or I guess far right in some cases, like, the idea of just dismissing things like intersectionality and stuff like that is just so, like, simple-minded sounds a bit like rude, but it is like just a very simplistic analysis. You know what I mean? Like, and I feel like to do so is just, it's just not like to do so is just kind of just to deny what reality is in some sense, right? Like if you look at history, right? Then there obviously will be ramifications of like a woman, for example, only getting the right to vote like 100 years ago. And it's like there's obvious ramifications of these things, and just to deny like their intersection with I guess more traditional ideas of social class and stuff is just like incorrect. First of all, because there's like a whole body of academic literature on it, but also I just don't ascribe to that narrative, I guess. But yeah,
I think especially the liberal left, I think they do make it kind of easy for these right-wing figures to attack them, because they don't oftentimes these people don't attach class or economics to the discussion of identity. So I think the way how some people just describe racial or gender disparities, I think that sometimes it lacks analysis, and this makes it easy for these figures to criticize them and say, oh, look at this, like you just play in the race card or whatever. But yeah, and you need to apply class to that. Also, you have to apply historical analysis and how that's affected people, gender and race, socially and economically. Because if you don't do that, it just makes them an easy target, So yeah, we need to come up with a more definitive explanation for this, because it's there and it is I feel it's the correct analysis. And yeah, I think people just sometimes just like harp on identity without tying it to other key important factors. So
yeah, I guess even more like it obviously we have some ideas to where these things have originated and stuff like that, but I mean more in terms of how to solve these issues, right? Because we want to actually not have these discrepancies, right, in society and stuff like that. So from my perspective, I think I don't know what you guys think, but do you think it would be better to have a more like to the solutions of these problems, do you think they should be more on a class base or by individual kind of identity groups in some sense? Because I've heard the arguments for both sides. I feel like more generally from what I've heard, I feel like the idea of tackling it on a class based policy route, I guess, would make more sense. Is like obviously that would disproportionately help as well some of these ethnic minority groups and things like that. You know, in conjunction with other sectors of society and stuff like that. But yeah, I was just wondering what your thoughts on it is.
I think there's certainly like advantages and disadvantages to both, not to kind of do that classic like sit on the fence thing, but I think it's so difficult in terms of like class and partisan de-alignment and things in recent years. I think a decentralized approach is certainly best, giving kind of funding and things to local communities and civic action projects and things like that for them to distribute it. But I think a purely kind of class-based funding the scheme, I'm not sure would work, just in terms of I don't think people are particularly conscious of their class. You know, even if they're kind of like as much as you can have the marking scales of like C1, D2, etc. Like putting people into those is going to be a lot more difficult. And even in terms of what people would have fit into pre-pandemic and post-pandemic in terms of the amount of people that have like lost their jobs, or that have been on furlough, or that were kind of unemployed but had some low-level like gig economy kind of 0 hours contract work, and now just have been like completely put on the breadline as a result of COVID. So I think it's an incredibly complex landscape, but I'm not too sure. Like, unfortunately, I don't think there's like any clear set kind of solution for that funding gap, but I'm not sure if a class one would be the best.
Yeah, I mean, in my eyes, I think there's two ways to look at it. I think on one hand, if you do look at class, for example, like I know, for example, if in America, I heard like, say, for example, if Bernie came into power, apparently like the universal programs that he would have adopted on his platform, they did some estimates that would be the biggest transfer of wealth to racial minority groups in America. Because obviously, as you know, historically, history has allowed these groups to be the majority working class groups that make up America. So I mean, regardless, just a class-based approach, making more universal programs would disproportionately improve the lives of BAME communities, I think. But on the other hand, you know, for example, we can look at a program like the NHS in the UK, which is universal and free for everyone. We still see problems and racial disparities in treatment, you know, and how certain groups are treated, and death rates in birth, for example, like BAME communities are disproportionately affected in that sense. So just to give a universal program and have a magic, like it's not going to fix everything with a magic wand. There'll still be, you know, disparities between races. So obviously, in my eyes, we should have more universal programs and address, you know, key working class issues. But also, you need to add some specific, you know, I wouldn't say details, but more specific actions that relate to different races. So you can address these disparities. So I don't think just focusing on class and that's it, you're still going to have people, especially like the working class who are disproportionately BAME community, they'll lose out on a lot of key necessities. But if you just focus on class, you're still going to have those disparities, despite might be less disparity, but it'll still be present. So you need to combine both, you know? Yeah. So it's like, essentially like as a baseline, like a universal program. And then from that baseline, you like build on top of it. Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, that's fair enough. I'd say I agree with that. Anyway, I don't know. Are you guys finished with your points there? We go with that? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, we're good. Following along from the whole COVID situation, we'll take a little bit of a step back. Dominic Cummings, you know, he was quite in the news in the summer and stuff like that. But, you know, these days, not so much, except, you know, recently. It came out that Dominic Cummings played quite an essential role in getting Public First, which is a policy and research company, a contract worth £500,000. And, at first, I guess you wouldn't be too concerned about this, right? Like, Dominic Cummings just gave a contract to a company. Why should we care? Well, of course we should care, because the founders of the company are friends with him and I guess various other figures within like the number 10 machine. Okay, so Dominic Cummings described himself as the decision maker in the process of awarding this contract as well. And then I guess finally, just to give some more context, the contract was essentially given to run a focus group on the effectiveness of government messaging. So I will say this, like the idea of a contract being awarded to look at the effectiveness of government messaging inherently is not a dumb idea. Like, obviously, if you're in a pandemic and you want people to stay at home, you need to test how efficient your messaging is, right? Like, that just makes sense. But the idea that it was given to such a close, to friends of the conservatives, that's where the issue lies, right? So there's probably like a little bit more nuance to that. But yeah, just more generally, I guess I wanted to raise this point to be like, well, first of all, we know that a lot of these contracts have gone to conservative friends. Like, you're 10 times more likely, I think the study that I read, to be awarded a contract if you knew like someone high up in the conservative government. So that's bad. But just more generally, I wanted to discuss the idea of corruption in the UK. I guess more broadly globally, because I think it applies almost everywhere you look, to be honest. But like, I would call this instance like this, like direct corruption. We can see a really easy, like traceable line between, knowing someone and them getting like a contract, for example. But more generally, I think that something which goes a little bit more undiscussed is like the idea of like the connections and networks which these people form. You know what I mean? It's not so much that you're gonna see something as blatantly obvious as this. You might just see you'll just see a lot of these people in government and things like different networks and stuff being like owners of different networks being friends, for example. Then all of a sudden you have certain biases in different media outlets and stuff like that. And my point is that this is kind of like, it just goes a bit untouched, that kind of section of idea of corruption, and is a much harder layer to tackle and stuff like that. So I guess I wanted to get your guys' thoughts on that, and I guess this issue as well, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, not much else to add to this, because we've seen this throughout this whole pandemic. Not only have the government outsourced different aspects of the public health to companies, which have been ultimately ineffective, but they've given these contracts to people that they know. And obviously, as you said, it's blatant corruption, and just handing it over to your mates. And I think honestly there should be more scrutiny to this, because there's been an overwhelmingly failure in these outsourcing programs, and the fact that you're giving it to your friends is mind-boggling. But going to a bigger picture, I think if you look at democracies such as us or the US, there was a famous Princeton study. This was more relating to America, but they're basically showing that in their eyes, based on popular support for certain programs and actually them being implemented into law, this has shown that there's not much correlation between the popular support and laws implemented. And they've noticed more of a correlation between
wasn't it
what big companies are pushing for and the laws that are put in place. And they basically said it was more of a oligarchy as opposed to a democracy. So, and I think that can be applied to the UK as well. That's what I wanted to say. More bigger picture, there is I do think there is an issue with democracy and oligarchy. Guys, the doctors just came early, so how's it go?
Yeah, no
But you can continue with your discussion. But yeah, that's all I wanted to add. I think I do think there's an issue with money in politics, especially not only an issue in the US but also in the UK.
Well, Rachel, I guess it's just me and you now. How exciting. I guess we can speak more about this section about like what I want to speak about essentially with the electric cars. And so Coventry is essentially planning permission for an electric car gigafactory, they call it. And it's set to start production in 2025. And so I wanted to highlight this because on this show, we love green energy. We love, fighting climate change, promoting, I guess the Green New Deal, at least I do. I'm sure Rachel's not exactly against it. And so, yeah, like, there's not much else to add except they're going to make a giant factory for batteries, but it plays more into the general discussion of climate change in the UK. And I saw, so we give, I feel like, the UK quite a rough time on like their climate policy because, and to be fair, I feel like they're heading towards being climate neutral at a slower rate than I would want to. With that being said, we also have to keep in mind that the UK relative to a lot of different EU countries and even globally is kind of leading the world in some sense with this sector, right? And so, but like, let me also be very clear. Like, that's a pretty low bar, I want to say. Like, the idea that we've known about this for so long, and we're going to be carbon neutral by 2050 is the goal. For me, just seems a bit too slow. Anyway, so yeah, but what I wanted to basically discuss with you, Rachel, is like the idea that I've spoken about on here before, and it's like the concept that, so at least people on the left wing, they really discuss community and things surrounding mining communities and stuff like that, right? And I guess more kind of factory-based production communities, right? And essentially whether like things like really promoting green technology could production in the UK could essentially give rise to something similar to that, if that makes sense. What do you think?
Yeah, no, for sure. I think it's really interesting in terms of this whole narrative that Johnson has of like build back better post COVID and kind of like this aim to really kind of have a good stronghold in this kind of like carbon neutral economy in the future and things. And I do think it's definitely worth highlighting that the UK has a good track record in recent years and in terms of policy setting and direction and things of green energy policies. However, as you said, like it is a very low bar internationally for that. There's a lot of EU member states which are really behind us, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we kind of are like leading the way in terms of doing huge amounts. Like we're leading the way, but to a lower extent. It's obviously still better than nothing, and the government have promised very ambitious kind of targets and goals and things, which I think will only be made like even more ambitious with a change of government. But yeah, I think that it's certainly an interesting one, and of course, like any kind of new factory or industry or something in aid of these policies is going to be a good thing. But I think just to add as well, what's really worth mentioning, I've read quite a lot of articles about how the left have done a good job at kind of captivating the market and kind of like ideas space of green policy and green agenda, but realistically it's not an issue that should have kind of an ideological stance, although left-wing politicians have been more likely to have more supportive policies in the past. It just should be completely unaffiliated with a party. Of course, we're not going to have that, but I think it is good, therefore, that the Conservatives have really kind of set this out as part of their agenda going forward.
Yeah, exactly. Couldn't agree more. So, hello?
Can you see me?
No.
Yeah, so I just had to get a COVID test because I'm traveling to Spain tomorrow for passport stuff. So sorry about that. A very brief interruption. So what are you guys discussing?
No worries. Welcome back, Samuel. We're just discussed the idea of the factory in Coventry, which is. Yeah, any thoughts? We basically just discussed like the idea of like, we give the UK quite a lot of grief about it, and like all things considered compared to like the international stance of things, the UK isn't that horrendous. They're actually leading the way in some way. But with that being said, obviously, it's a pretty low bar.
Yeah, no, yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, I think overall about the news itself, I think it is good news, especially the fact that we are bringing, the production back to the UK and we're doing production, locally, which I think is a positive thing. And hopefully that comes with, stable jobs and jobs that have unions. But I'm doubtful about that part. But yeah, hopefully it comes with more stable jobs that people can, that they earn a living from. So in that sense, it's positive. But yeah, I mean, as always, I think there is caveats to, I think, electric cars in general as a means to address climate crisis. Because I mean, obviously it is better than normal cars and it's less wasteful, but especially its production in general is quite pollutant heavy, first of all. And I think in a general sense, I think it's not. I don't think it shouldn't be the main focus on addressing climate change, because I mean, I think for the most part, I think we should be, as we mentioned in other episodes, I think public transit should be the main form of addressing these crises, because not everyone can ride cars, and in some cases we want less cars on the road, because oftentimes there is complications and it leads to more traffic and just more inconvenience for people. So I think we should be more focused on, on public transit. Obviously, there's a space for electric cars, but yeah, I don't think it should be the leading point for that. So yeah, and along with that, as I said, is the production is quite pollutant. But I'm also, in that sense, I'm more confident because I think we'll see a large amount of investment in the next few years, an increased investment in green tech, and I think that will lead to more clean production. So that, I mean, that could also be addressed moving forward. But also I think one of the main things about just the green shift in general, I think the key aspect is the global supply chain. I think it's great that we want to have greener technology and, transfer to more clean alternatives. But I think we really need to think about how our global supply chain plays a role in sourcing these materials and minerals. And in my eyes, I think under this current global capitalist system, I think we'll see the same exploitation in countries in the global south as we've seen already. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, I think a lot of these corporations, they will be investing more heavily into these green technologies. But while they still continue to dictate policy and also avoid accountability in these countries in the global south, we'll still see situations like we see in Congo, for example, as we've discussed, with cobalt production, will be used in batteries moving forward. And we can see these horrible conditions there and even reports of child labor. And that is supposedly a green, something that'll be used in green technology. But we can still see the clear issues, sourcing these materials from countries like Congo. Also, we can even see stuff like what we discussed in Bolivia in the coup of Evo Morales. He thinks that a lot of the reason why he was, kicked out of office was because of lithium, and to create a more favorable environment for extraction there for, countries in the global north. I mean, while you cannot really pinpoint that as the reason. I'm sure history has showed us that, corporations and countries do these things to get more favorable agreements with countries. So I definitely think we need to rethink how we go about developing these green technologies and how we source them. And I think hopefully, I mean, in my positive mind frame, hopefully this can be used to reverse the uneven and underdevelopment of the relationship that we have with countries in the global south, and hopefully we can try to reverse that relationship and try create a more even development in green technologies. Because also at the end of the day, a lot of the countries in the global south are the ones that are worst affected by climate change. So yeah, I definitely think we need to come up with a more even way of building and sourcing these technologies. But yeah, I think that's quite unlikely. But yeah, hopefully my optimist mind frame is coming up here. So we'll see.
Also, just in terms of like distribution of them, obviously we've seen a massive divide in terms of the COVID vaccine with the global south. But like this idea of the global north getting access to certain goods before the global south does, and there's like that delay there, is something which, well, first of all, we can't afford it, right? Like we need this has to be a global effort because we've left it for a very long time, and we can't have certain countries just pumping out carbon because they don't have access to this technology. So that's also probably a key point to highlight. And also say, in terms of like, also, I don't know if people really know this, but like the reason why we always bring up lithium is because, it might sound a bit like random, why lithium? It makes no sense. But lithium's like the key component of literally so much technology, things like electric vehicles, things like certain computer batteries and stuff like that. So that's just why. And the process of extracting, sorry, this is a bit of like a chemistry nerd rant, so pardon me. But like the actual process of extracting lithium is very polluting from what I know. And so a good way to kind of tackle this field, I guess, is to provide funding for researchers and stuff to basically figure out more sustainable ways to extract it. So yeah, sorry about that little nerdy tangent, but it's
I mean, I will say,
go? No, go for it.
No, I will say about that. I mean, I don't really want to begrudge countries in the global south about extracting, minerals from their country to raise the living standards of the people in the country, because, I mean, they haven't had the luxury of the countries in the global north have, as to pollute at will historically and build our wealth from that. They don't have that luxury because now, we have a climate emergency. And I mean, obviously, yes, as I said, I don't hold them as to high standards because they do need to develop as a country economically and the standards of living. So I don't blame them. But yeah, I mean, ideally, I think maybe we have to, as you said, it needs to be an international process. So where if we want them to stop extracting all these resources to build wealth, we need to fund them, and provide some sort of aid. So with not much, because aid is also an issue with loans and all that stuff. It creates a lot of complications. But maybe some form of support to help them build their nation without extracting resources as much. Yeah. But yeah, that, I mean,
my main point
and also remember, like they also extracting to provide for us. So
yeah.
So yeah, I mean,
no, my main point there was more like, oh, we mustn't, like, yeah, I fully agree with you. Like, we mustn't berate these countries for extracting these minerals. But like, the idea is that we should be funding ways to research more sustainable ways of doing so because they aren't really necessary, and like technology relies on them. But like more so, it's also adding on to your point, the reason why we have a climate crisis in the first place is literally as a function of countries just polluting at will. And like, I see Rachel nodding her head there, so I might bring her in to kind of add more onto that if she would like.
Sure. I think that it's really important as well. Like, as much as these kind of huge like multinational companies do set their own agendas and kind of like they are huge polluters, they are also only reacting to consumer demands. So when there's kind of like there's something in the market that, for example, I always look at the oat milk and kind of moves towards like veganism and things. If you looked on supermarket shelves 10 years ago, there just wasn't like any kind of like plant-based milk alternatives, whereas now there's been that sort of change in consumer demand, and there are huge amounts of alternatives. So as much as it is big companies that are like polluting huge amounts into the atmosphere, a lot of what they are polluting to create is what consumers are buying. Like, for example, like it's difficult to say that unless the individual changes their kind of shopping habits and patterns, then the industry as a whole can't, because I do think that like it is governments and kind of corporations that need to set the agenda. But I think that the two have to work kind of like mutually exclusively in that. Apart from that, I just kind of echo what you're both saying, especially, if you look at the Congo and things, for years and years and years, there has been exploitation, there has been slave labor, systematic rape techniques and things, real atrocities to mine the kind of like chemicals and minerals and things that we all have in our MacBooks and our iPhones, and it's just so detached from our final product that I think few people realize, or we've just become so desensitized to it over time that it's not seen as an issue. So I think with that slight tangent, I've slightly lost my point, but I think it's important. Yeah, just to highlight those things. And Benji, I especially like kind of from that like chemistry point of view that most people aren't maybe aware of the different things that make up so much of our technology. They perhaps think it's, or certainly I did, like a myriad of different kind of things, but realistically there are some very kind of common substances that are found across a lot of these things, and they all come from very similar regions with similar kind of geopolitical stances and have been similarly exploited by Western governments over time.
Something I will say just about on the company thing is like yeah, you're correct. Like I think it's 75% of pollution or like polluting globally comes from only like 10 companies, or it's either 10 or 100 companies. Getting my factors wrong, but it's like incredibly small amount. And I don't think, well, first of all, there's things that go into that, right? I think that a portion of this pollution is coming from bad practices from these companies because it's cheaper to do so in some sense, and some of it is genuinely like, oh, it's difficult to like if your demand is like let's say you're like, you know, selling meat, right, and like millions and millions of people are getting your product per day, right? Like there's like some geographical issues there as well, which sure could definitely be solved, but it also would be cutting into certain profit margins and stuff like that. Like the whole idea, like for example, when we see these horrible videos of like chickens and stuff like that being stuffed into like these tiny cages, and then like, I don't want to get into like real details because it's really gruesome, but like essentially the forced mating of like different animals to give us products essentially is like, I think that's also partly a function of the whole idea of like profits dominating certain companies' motives essentially. So I just want to make that point because like, yeah, I definitely agree with your point about consumers and their impact in like really advancing the green message is like crucial. But again, as you also highlighted there, it is important to consider the impact of these, you know, corporations and governments which aren't really holding them accountable, you know, like, and that's like just the real fact of the matter, you know?
Yeah, exactly. I think, I mean, obviously, it is important for consumers to become more aware and, also put pressure on these companies to change their ways. But, I think, at the end of the day, like the way of, like the production method is the main source of pollution. And, I think it's the responsibility of the government to come up with a clear set of laws that force these companies to follow suit. Because I think ultimately, companies won't be that interested in finding new, cleaner methods of production because ultimately, like doing research and development to establish this, because ultimately I think that cuts into the short-term profits that they're very interested in keeping. And alongside that, historically, these companies have gone overseas to, because of there's less regulations in certain countries when it comes to environmental protection, for example. And even in like free trade agreements, there's even in the law, like it gives these companies protection to avoid accountability when it comes to environmental degradation. And when countries, challenge, a lot of them do challenge these corporations on their practices, they have to go to international court where oftentimes corporations are favored because, as I said, it is in the free trade agreements, these leeways to allow them to do it. So on one hand, obviously, as consumers, we need to become aware of these systems and how they interact. But also, we definitely need to target more, stricter environmental regulations. And reassess, because obviously, in regards to free trade, I don't think it's inherently a bad thing to do that, but it just needs to be done with deep regard and I think spotlighting environmental and labor, standards. Yeah. So it's a complex issue for sure. But I think there's we have to have both of these take both of them into account, like the companies and the corporations and the government, along with raising the awareness of the consumer.
Exactly. Couldn't have said it better myself, to be honest. So yeah, after that lively discussion, I guess we've kind of entered the realm of the international sphere, right? So yeah, I mean, I guess our first one on this international-esque list is the whole Trump impeachment fiasco, which, if you actually pay close attention to politics, I don't think you would really be surprised by the outcome of it. So, Trump was acquitted from the Senate. So he went on for impeachment for essentially inciting the Capitol riot and stuff like that. Yeah, overall, like, I'm not really surprised at the outcome. Like, the Republicans which voted in favor of impeachment, like, the reality is that a lot of these Republicans are retiring or just won re-election, so they're not really threatened in any way by, like, their voter base. Yeah, I mean, I think more than, like, I think overall what this is essentially speaking to, this whole result, is just the idea that where the Republican base is in America. Like, I saw this poll recently that 63% of voters, if Trump made a new Republican voters, if Trump made a new party, would become members of that party instead of the Republican Party. So the reality is that, like, these Republican, senators are genuinely scared of offending their base to the point which they'll be kicked out of there because, they're anti-Trump. And I guess kind of speaks, like, quite intensely to kind of the cult of personality that Trump has managed to build up around him. And yeah, like, just, yeah, kind of insane. I don't know, like, it's in my eyes, it's so blatantly obvious that this guy started this riot, right? And, like, it killed 5 people, or is it 5 or 6? I think something like that, which is genuinely horrible. And this idea that it's become so partisan in the U.S. that you can't even, convict him of impeachment, right? Is unreal. And this is like something like with Watergate even. That the reason why Nixon stepped down was because he knew he was going to be convicted in the Senate, right? And so it just shows, I guess, a drift to more partisan politics in the U.S. and things like that. So yeah, what are you guys' thoughts?
Yeah, I definitely. Obviously, in my eyes, he should have been impeached for his actions. Because for me, yeah, as you said, for me, it's quite clear that he did have a role in inciting these riots that ultimately could have been much more damaging to the people in government. It could have been, I mean, it was deadly already. It was 5 deaths, but it could have been even worse. So I definitely think he should have been impeached in that sense. But as you said, I'm not surprised with the fact that he was acquitted. I think it was always going to be the case in that sense. And ultimately, obviously, I think I'm also not surprised that the Republicans majority voted for him to be acquitted. Because, that as you said, he is, no matter if you like it or not, he's the popular figure in the Republican Party. And these people are playing politics, and they know that if they voted to impeach him, their base wouldn't be super happy. So I'm not surprised that they voted to acquit him. And at the end of the day, it just makes the Democrats look worse, because at the end of the day, he got acquitted, and it makes him seem like an even more grandiose character now, because a lot of Republicans see him as someone who's defeating the system, defeating those establishment figures in the government. And the Democrats, they try to get him with Russia, but they couldn't get him. And now, they couldn't get him with this impeachment scandal. So I think sometimes, like, in some sense, it builds him up and makes him look better. And I don't know, like, it's complicated, because on one hand, it's a reasonable thing to try to get him impeached, but if you look at the optics of the situation, you could have guessed that he was going to get acquitted, Yeah. So I don't know how I would have gone about it if I was Democrats.
Before I go to you, Rachel, I just want to say one thing. Like, the Democrats now, their whole strategy I've been seeing, like, floated around online, read some articles about it, is trying to, like, they're basically, the strategy into, like, these midterm elections happening in 2022, I believe, is to label the Republicans as, like, the party of QAnon and try to paint them as, like, radical and stuff like that. And this is just, in my view, just a genuinely dumb way to try frame re-election and stuff like that. Because, look, at the end of the day, we speak quite a lot about this. We need to appeal to people's like material needs, and at the end of the day, like sure, Republicans are gonna be if you like, they can be labeled as QAnon or whatever all they want, but if they're speaking more effectively in terms of their rhetoric and like promising things to the majority of people and people who need it, then obviously you're going to get those people's votes. And like, to me, this just rings so many bells to like the idea of what, the Dems were doing in this 2020 election, which is appealing to the suburb and like the suburban vote. And like, sure, you may have gotten away with that now, but that's not a long-term strategy, like, and it just shows like, I feel like the Democrats are just not serious in this respect. Like, they need to change their game plan. And sure, in some ways they have, but not to the extent which they need to, I think.
Yeah, I mean, really, just to kind of echo the points that you've both made there, the Democrats, a new incoming president has like 100 days basically of a captive media to really roll out their agenda, set what they are going to do, how their presidency is going to be different, and their kind of key priorities in the White House. Now, he did have a good first kind of run of overturning executive orders, and they really made headlines. But again, as you're saying, like for the Democrat Party, it's again just like the Trump show. And is Trump gonna maybe go and do something crazy again and go rogue and create his own party? And how much of an impact is that going to have? And what are they gonna do against that like Trump party at the next general election? These like crazy hypotheses which just haven't even come into fruition yet. Biden is having to fight with, rather than his own kind of domestic agenda with COVID. He's trying desperately to highlight some of the kind of like stimulus and things that he's hoping to give to citizens, some more around his international policy. I saw today that China have officially overtaken the US as the EU's biggest trading partner. So, there's clearly like big international questions that are hanging over Biden's head that he's just not having the capacity to answer at the moment with these ongoing trials. I agree, it's not a huge surprise. Similarly, the Republican Party have to do some soul searching in terms of the direction that they're going to go on, like the legacy of Trump. I think it's very comparable to the New Labour kind of Blair years, and on an even wider scale in terms of like geography alone and population. But it's something that the Labour Party is still fighting with today, and that, is Starmer more of a new Blair, like rather than a Corbyn, which clearly didn't go down well. Well, the Republican Party, if they're not careful, are going to have exactly the same issue, but possibly kind of even more catastrophic. So I think
Sad, go for it. Oh, Rachel, do you have anything else to say? Sorry, we cut you off there.
Exactly. If you look at it, it's just crazy to kind of see what direction it could go in.
Yeah. Samuel?
Yeah, no, definitely. We would like the Republican Party to go soul searching, but I think they're very optimistic because, first of all, if they do, I think it will be to the detriment of their popularity within the country because, Trump, as I said, he is popular within the constituents, like he had a record turnout for them. Biden also did, but he had a record turnout for Republicans. As you said, like a lot of them would consider joining a third party of his. So I think it'll be hard for them to soul search. Yeah. But also in general, I think they're not that much different to him. I think he just says the quiet part out loud. They are, like, a lot of these people have been saying stuff about it, like, similar to what he said, like around immigrants, around minorities, but they just said it in a more indirect way. I think you could assume a lot of what they said. But yeah, Trump just said it out loud, like blatantly. And so I do think they don't differ that much ideologically speaking as well. So I don't know how much soul searching there will be, but hopefully eventually they will. And and also, sorry, Benj, but around the idea of like what you're saying about the party of QAnon. Yeah, I agree. I think it is a very stupid strategy because I think a lot for the first, like, I think that's kind of like a way of shaming Republican voters instead of winning them over with key issues like bread and butter issues. Because a lot of, like, you can make fun of QAnon supporters if you want, but there's a reason why a lot of them think the way they think, and there's a lot of, like, pay, like a lot of them have like issues like mistrust in the government. Some of them have been hard done by. I mean, not all of them. Some of them are, well off, but they still believe in that stuff. But there's just general issues, they have with government. And instead of shaming them, you should try win these people over on material needs. But yeah, I mean, as you said, it's just ineffective, I think. And I'm just gonna create more, partisan gap, instead of appealing on popular issues, which I feel the left has. They have a lot of popular economic agenda if they wanted to stick to it, but yeah, they stoop into this level. So yeah, we'll see how it pans out.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, yeah, I definitely will see how it pans out. But I mean, I kind of want to say two things. Like your point about cutting across party lines to to get people kind of to have people's needs met essentially is a key point, because like I feel like this gets glossed over all the times in like political discourse, and it's like the main idea of people in like the majority of society have like similar needs and similar kind of wants and aspirations in terms of like how they want to live their life. Like they don't want to be starving, they don't want to be homeless, they don't want to be poor and stuff like that. They want to have a good life for themselves, their children, etc. If you can care to that, like you will get support from whatever side of the ideological spectrum you're talking about, because it's just really impactful and like is like a substantive change, again, as we said multiple times. So I just wanted to emphasize that, and also like speak a little bit more to the idea of how pardon my language, but how screwed the Republicans are, because like genuinely I don't understand what they're gonna do. Like they have their game plan. Like what, they have no game plan. They can't purge like 60% of their party, because then you're gonna have the Republican freedom lovers from both sides be like, oh yes, we can't. We have to have freedom and all this stuff, and you can't be authoritarian. And like, to be fair, that's fair enough. Like no party should purge 60% of their democratically elected members, and also. But by the same token, your messaging still has to be like this conspiratorial route, because that's what their base wants and needs. So like these Republicans which you see coming out against Trump, like Mitt Romney, to be fair, he was like one of the first ones. It's like I don't understand. I'm just curious what they're thinking in their head, because like they can come across as this sort of like sensible Republican politician, but in reality, whether or not they're popular with their base is a whole different ballgame. And I'm not sure if they really are.
Trump definitely has more energy than Romney in the
base.
That's not
also like Liz Cheney. First of all, I mean Liz Cheney, like who's one of the senior figures of the Republican Party, was like getting slaughtered by not slaughtered like literally, like figuratively, obviously, like by members in Congress and stuff, because she came out for the impeachment of Trump. And it's like, and it just goes to show how Liz Cheney also representing a different era of U.S. politics, being the daughter of Dick Cheney, war hawk, and like it just shows a different kind of a new era of Republican politics in the U.S., where you kind of are rejecting this more traditional, suit and tie, like a well-spoken politician, for a more like brazen politician, which really like hits home and is really passionate, I guess, like about certain points. Like say whatever you want about Trump, he's good in terms of, I feel like, hitting like approaching and hitting people's feelings on certain issues, and really like manipulating it in certain ways so that they feel essentially anger and feelings towards like different identity groups and stuff like that. But yeah, that's like little tangent over there. Rachel, you have anything else to add to that?
Yeah, I think really, like, you've both summarized it really, really well. The only thing that I would add is it's so interesting, kind of like QAnon and things like this, like as much as you can and quite rightfully should dismiss it, it's clearly from this like very deep rooted place that you have such kind of conspiracy theories and stuff like that. And Trump really did connect with that base, and this kind of drain the swamp, anti-establishment Washington elite really fed into it. And I think as much as people said that by his second re-election and things, he wouldn't be able to run on that ticket anymore, he was establishment anyway in terms of his kind of tax avoidance business.
So many things.
Yeah, so many things like that. But I think it was even more difficult for him to after his first 4 years in office. But he still managed to do that, still managed to kind of distance himself from that Washington elite. So I think it's something that he can keep coming back to, and will really, really kind of connect with a lot of the base. But I'm not sure what the kind of antidote for that is in terms of how to combat it realistically. But I think I just echo what you've both said in terms of more of that analysis there. I couldn't really add anything.
Yeah. Shall we move on, or do you want to add one thing real quick, Sir?
Yeah, let me quickly, because we've been going on quite a while for this. But I mean, it's first of all, honestly, it's kind of crazy that he still maintained this anti-establishment figure, because in office he enacted mainstream Republican laws and legislation, so he didn't stray away that differently from the prior Republican administrations. But I mean, in regards to QAnon, because I kind of have personal experience in people who believe certain things around QAnon, I do think, but you do notice there's a frustration with the establishment in politics, and anger that there hasn't been much to address key issues in your life, But this anger is comes without any class or economic analysis attached to it. So when you're looking for answers around these failures, you can go to crazy extremes and look at stuff that is not real. So we have to try and make people aware and look at certain class analysis, economic analysis, to understand why they are where they are. And and when I say reach across the aisle, I mean be more partisan. I don't mean moving more centrist or to more right. I'm just looking at popular issues like $5 minimum wage, or the 1,400 COVID relief bill. These are all popular, that are supported by the vast majority of people in America, Republican or Democrat. So in that sense, I mean, find partisan support in these popular policies, and address material needs and try to educate people around the current situation. Otherwise, they're gonna continue to turn towards QAnon and these crazy conspiracy theories. Yeah, that's all.
Beautiful way to sum it up. But I definitely agree with all that. Okay, Rachel, do you want to go on to Princess Latifah?
Yes, so it emerged this last week that Princess Latifah, I hope I'm pronouncing her name right, has been held hostage, captive, in what is being described as a very luxurious but still prison-like complex in Dubai. And the UN have today come out and they've said that they are going to raise the case with the UAE in a very kind of direct manner. The UK's foreign minister, international minister, has said that it supports this action of the UN. Obviously, we're always quite keen. We never particularly like to cause any aggression with the UAE in terms of the trade that we do with them. So it's interesting that Rob came out today and kind of said it was fully supporting this UN-backed kind of motion and probably inquiry. In the meantime, the princess's other family members have said that just kind of quick video snaps and photos alone aren't enough, that she needs to be released and freed and able to freely kind of engage in public discussion and make public appearances. They're not sure what kind of mental or physical condition she's realistically in at the moment. So I think it was a shock for everyone, and it's certainly dominated the headlines and the front pages today. But yeah, super interesting, and hopefully she is now released. And this thing doesn't continue to happen.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, something which I Yeah. It's obviously, it's not good. We're not for that in any stretch of the imagination. But something which I would think is probably more, although this is interesting, I think a more interesting line of discussion, I guess, is more surrounding the idea of kind of women's rights in these countries. I can say that I am the most knowledgeable on a lot of feminist issues globally. Although obviously, I am a feminist by definition, but like the whole idea surrounding, at least what I see in like the liberal left, right, is like a lot of a focus on more, I don't like Western issues surrounding feminism. So I spoke to Rachel about this before, like ideas surrounding like microaggressions and things like that, like, and more like I guess cultural biases towards women and stuff like that, which like obviously are important and you need to address them. But like, how would you say like what role do kind of these like feminists in the West have to play when it comes to countries that are really kind of oppressing women's rights overall? Because in my mind, like I feel like the messaging from at least like the sect of the liberal left that I'm speaking about needs to definitely switch to have something which is a more global outlook and approach to things and stuff like that. So I just wonder what your thoughts on it were.
Yeah, I'll just come in there really quickly in terms of, I think you're very right in how a lot of kind of maybe right-wing outlets critique feminism and kind of like the movement for gender equality and equal rights and things as something that maybe doesn't need to be worried about anymore. They're like, okay, fair enough, 100 years ago women like were disenfranchised, didn't have a vote, didn't have suffrage, all of these things. Well, that's not an issue anymore. They're very quick to kind of critique any talk of a gender pay gap or anything like that. And I think that it really, really negates the feminist movement as like an intersectional movement, an international movement that is focusing on these huge issues, like as much as like just kind of what Benji and I were speaking about earlier in terms of how microaggressions, it's all like a pyramid, and you have these things at the bottom, and then at the top you have kind of like gendered violence and things like we're seeing with Princess Latifah. But you have to kind of accept all of that in order to be able to combat what's coming right at the top. And on that kind of same spectrum, you've got things like FGM has only increased pandemic, kind of like police services and surveillance being directed into other avenues, like that's seen a huge increase. There are so many gendered issues which are still just not getting the kind of airtime that they need. And I think this is symptomatic of that problem. So I agree completely that in terms of looking at feminism on the international stage, there is just like a huge amount to really kind of like digest and get involved in. For example, I think it was Saudi Arabia, women weren't allowed to own or drive cars until super recently. Yeah. So you can't kind of highlight these advances and say, oh, well, they're allowed to do this now and this now, because it's such low level stuff that like it shouldn't even be something that was ever to be negotiated. Yeah. So yeah, it's certainly like a very hot topic right now. And I think, as you say, kind of more widely, what this story will lead to in terms of like longer term consequences is very interesting.
Yeah, for sure. Sai, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, regarding the Pacific case, I'm not too familiar with it, but we can touch on the broader implications of women's rights. I agree with Rachel in the sense that obviously the different spectrums of the severity of gender discrimination, and we do have to take them all, have to embrace every issue there and address all of them at once. You don't have to just focus on like the serious issues like gender violence. You can, obviously that's a key focus, but obviously there's the smaller issues in day-to-day life that also need to be addressed. In regards to like particularly in like the Middle East and the Arab world in general, when it comes to women's rights, I mean, I think a lot of it is, what I think gets ignored is the political aspect and history of gender equality within the Middle East and the Arab world, because especially in the like post-colonial era, there were quite a few leaders. I can think of particularly in Egypt, I think Iran as well, Syria, where there were leaders who were more left-wing and socialist-leaning, who were quite progressive when it came to women's rights, But ultimately, as with a lot of left-wing leaders around the world, a lot of them got overthrown, whether it's direct or